The 1970s was a decade of bold ideas, wild experiments, and spectacular flops. Some products were trying to solve the energy crisis, while others were just plain disasters waiting to happen. From exploding cars to rocks in a box, these inventions promised the future but delivered chaos. Let's take a look back at the biggest product failures of the 70s. The Ford Pinto. In the early 1970s, the American automotive industry was facing a crisis. Gas prices were climbing, and drivers were ditching their massive muscle cars for smaller, more efficient imports from Japan and Germany. Ford needed an answer, and they needed it fast. Enter the Ford Pinto. This was supposed to be the car that saved Detroit. It was small, stylish, and incredibly affordable, weighing under 2,000 pounds and costing under $2,000. On paper, it was the perfect vehicle for the era, a fuel-efficient subcompact that the average American family could actually afford. It was poised to be a massive hit, and initially, sales were strong. It looked like Ford had cracked the code for the economy car market. But there was just one problem, a problem that would turn into one of the biggest scandals in corporate history. To keep the car cheap and light, engineers had placed the fuel tank right behind the rear axle with very little protection. This design flaw meant that if the Pinto was rear-ended, even at low speeds, the fuel filler neck could tear away, spraying gasoline everywhere. In a collision, the car had a terrifying tendency to burst into flames. It wasn't just a fender bender, it was a potential firebomb. Ford faced a massive public backlash, fueled by internal memos suggesting they knew about the danger, but calculated that paying off lawsuits was cheaper than fixing the cars. The Pinto became a symbol of corporate negligence. While it sold millions of units, the brand was destroyed. It became the punchline of late-night jokes and a cautionary tale for engineers everywhere. The Pinto proved that cutting corners to save a few dollars could cost a company its reputation and cost drivers their lives. Betamax. In 1975, Sony introduced something that felt like magic, the ability to record television. Before this, if you missed a show, it was gone forever. But Sony's Betamax promised to change all that. The dream was incredible, time-shifting. You could watch whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted. The Betamax cassette was compact, the picture quality was excellent, and the machine itself was a sturdy piece of high-tech engineering. Sony believed they had created the ultimate home video format, and for a brief moment, they owned the market. They envisioned a world where every home had a Betamax sitting under the TV, cementing Sony as the king of home entertainment. Sounds great, right? Well, they overlooked one crucial detail that consumers cared about more than anything else: recording time. The original Betamax tapes could only record for 1 hour. Sony's engineers argued that most TV shows were an hour or less, so why would anyone need more? They completely failed to account for movies and football games. A year later, JVC released VHS. The tapes were clunky and the picture quality wasn't quite as sharp, but a VHS tape could record for 2 hours and eventually 4. This difference was fatal. You could fit an entire movie or the Super Bowl on a single VHS tape, whereas Betamax required you to get up and swap tapes in the middle of the action. Video rental stores didn't want to stock 2 different formats, so they gravitated toward the one consumers preferred. By the time Sony released longer recording tapes, it was too late. VHS had won the war. Betamax lingered for years as a niche product for videophiles, but in the mass market, it became the definition of a superior product, losing out to a more practical one. The Bricklin SV1. Before the DeLorean captured our imaginations in the 80s, there was the Bricklin SV1. Launched in 1974, the SV stood for Safety Vehicle, and the ambition behind it was staggering. The idea was to build the safest sports car the world had ever seen. It featured a futuristic acrylic body that was bonded to fiberglass, meaning it was dent-resistant and didn't need paint. It had an integrated roll cage, massive bumpers designed to absorb impacts, and, of course, gull-wing doors that opened upward. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in the suburbs. The dream was to combine high-performance style with tank-like safety. creating a car that was cool enough for a bachelor, but safe enough for a family man. But reality hit the Bricklin hard. The very features that made it safe also made it incredibly heavy. The car weighed so much that the engine struggled to give it any real sports car performance. It was sluggish, loud, and prone to overheating. And then there were the doors. The gull-wing doors were operated by a hydraulic system that was notoriously unreliable. If the battery died or the hydraulics leaked, you were literally trapped inside your safety vehicle with no way to get out. To make matters worse, the acrylic body had a nasty habit of cracking and warping if left out in the hot sun. The company struggled with quality control and ran out of money almost as quickly as they started. Only about 3,000 units were produced before the company folded in 1976. The Bricklin SV1 remains a fascinating footnote in automotive history. A car that tried to do too much too soon and proved that building a car company from scratch is one of the hardest things to do in business. Quadrophonic sound. In the early 1970s, the audio industry decided that stereo, 2 speakers, just wasn't enough. They wanted to immerse the listener in a 360-degree wall of sound. Enter quadrophonic sound. The promise was spectacular. By placing 4 speakers in the 4 corners of a room, you could hear music swirling around you. Bands like Pink Floyd and The Who began mixing their albums specifically for this format. It was supposed to be the next leap forward in high-fidelity audio, turning your living room into a concert hall. Audiophiles were told that once they heard quad, they would never go back to boring old stereo. However, the execution was a mess. The biggest problem was that there wasn't a single standard format. There were competing systems like SQ, QS, and CD4, and they weren't compatible with each other. If you bought a record encoded for one system, it might not sound right on your equipment. On top of that, the cost of entry was astronomical. You needed a special turntable, a special expensive amplifier, and 4 large speakers. In the mid-70s, asking teenagers to buy 2 extra speakers was a hard sell. Consumers were confused and hesitant to invest thousands of dollars in a format war with no clear winner. Plus, setting up 4 wired speakers in a typical 1970s living room was a logistical nightmare. The format flopped hard by the end of the decade. While the idea of surround sound was valid, quadrophonic was just too expensive and complicated for the time. It would take another 20 years for 5.1 surround sound to finally realize the dream that quad failed to deliver. Polavision. Edwin Land, the genius founder of Polaroid, changed the world with instant photography. In 1977, he tried to do the same for movies with a system called Polavision. The concept was mind-blowing. Instant home movies. No more sending your Super 8 film to a lab and waiting weeks to see if you got the shot. With Polavision, you could shoot a film cartridge, pop it into a special player, and watch your movie just 90 seconds later. It felt like the future. Polaroid believed this would be the next ubiquitous household item, capturing birthdays and holidays with instant gratification. But there was just one problem. Actually, several. The technology relied on a dense, specialized film that required an immense amount of light. If you tried to shoot indoors without blinding studio lights, the resulting movie was dark, grainy, and barely watchable. Furthermore, the film cartridge could only be viewed on the proprietary Polavision player, which had a tiny screen. You couldn't project it onto a wall for the whole family to see, and it had no sound. The biggest nail in the coffin, however, was bad timing. Just as Polavision launched, the first video camcorders were appearing on the horizon. Videotapes were reusable, could record sound, and played directly on your TV. Polavision was obsolete the moment it hit the shelves. It was an expensive, closed ecosystem in a world that was moving toward open video formats. Polaroid lost millions on the project, and it stands as a reminder that even the most innovative companies can misread the direction of technology. The AMC Pacer. If the 1970s had a face, it might just be the AMC Pacer. Introduced in 1975, It was marketed as the first wide small car. The dream was to create a compact vehicle that didn't feel cramped. By making the car unusually wide, AMC promised the interior space of a luxury Cadillac in a package that could fit into a compact parking spot. It featured massive glass windows for unparalleled visibility and a unique futuristic bubble shape. It was supposed to be the ultimate urban runabout for the modern driver, but in reality, it was a greenhouse on wheels. All that glass turned the interior into an oven. In the summer, the air conditioning systems of the era simply couldn't keep up with the solar heat gain, cooking the passengers alive. The car was also strangely heavy for its size, which meant it got terrible gas mileage, the exact opposite of what people wanted during an oil crisis. It was sluggish, thirsty, and looked undeniably weird. Then there was the design quirk that drove people crazy. The passenger door was 4 inches longer than the driver's door. The idea was to make it easier to load passengers from the curb, but it made the car asymmetrical and annoying to park in tight garages. The Pacer became a joke, dubbed the Flying Fishbowl. While it has gained a cult following today, thanks to movies like Wayne's World, in the 70s, it was a symbol of weird design gone wrong. Clackers, curbangers. Every decade has a toy that seems designed to injure children, and for the 70s, it was Clackers. The concept was deceptively simple: 2 heavy acrylic balls attached by a sturdy string. You held a ring in the middle and moved your hand up and down to get the balls to smack against each other. Clack, clack, clack. The goal was to get them swinging in a rhythmic arc above and below your hand. It was addictive, loud, and fun. It was the fidget spinner of its day, but with a lot more kinetic energy. However, there was a serious design flaw. The balls were made of hard acrylic plastic. When slammed together repeatedly at high velocity, they had a terrifying tendency to shatter. We aren't talking about a little crack. We are talking about exploding. Shards of sharp plastic would fly into children's eyes and faces, turning playtime into a trip to the emergency room. Even if they didn't shatter, the velocity was high enough that if you missed the rhythm and hit your own wrist bone, it caused deep bruises and even fractures. The injuries piled up, and parents were horrified. By 1976, the FDA classified them as a mechanical hazard, and they were pulled from shelves. Clackers vanished almost overnight, leaving a legacy as one of the most dangerous toys ever sold to children. The Chevrolet Vega. General Motors wanted to crush the rising wave of imports with the Chevy Vega. Launched in 1971, the promise was a high-quality, American-made compact car. It was stylish, it handled well, and it even won Car of the Year awards upon its release. It looked like a mini Camaro and was supposed to prove that Detroit could build small cars just as well as anyone else. GM touted its revolutionary aluminum engine technology, which was lighter and more efficient than the old cast-iron blocks. But the Vega turned out to be a disaster. The engineering of the aluminum engine was rushed. The metal was prone to warping if it got even slightly too hot. This caused the engine to vibrate excessively and consume massive amounts of oil. Owners reported topping off their oil every time they filled up with gas. But the engine wasn't the only problem. The rust-proofing process at the factory was deeply flawed. Vegas were known to start rusting almost immediately. In snowy states where salt was used on the roads, the front fenders would literally rot away within 2 winters. The car essentially dissolved around you. The Vega shattered the public's faith in GM's engineering. It became synonymous with the word lemon and forced GM to spend millions on recalls and retrofits. Instead of saving the American small car, the Vega helped drive even more customers toward reliable imports like Toyota and Honda. Mattel's Colonial Viper. In 1978, following the massive success of Star Wars, Mattel released a line of toys for the TV show Battlestar Galactica. The star of the lineup was the Colonial Viper, a cool spaceship that came with a special feature. It could fire a small red plastic missile from its nose. The promise was action-packed play. Kids could recreate space battles right in their living rooms, shooting down Cylons and saving the galaxy. It was the toy every kid wanted. But tragedy struck shortly after its release. The missile was small, red, and looked vaguely like a piece of candy. In 1978, a 4-year-old child aimed the toy into his mouth, fired the missile, and tragically choked to death. Other reports surfaced of children inhaling or swallowing the high-velocity projectiles. The toy had turned from a fun spaceship into a lethal hazard. The reaction changed the toy industry forever. Mattel issued a massive recall, asking parents to send the missiles back. But more importantly, this specific failure led to the modern safety regulations regarding small parts and choking hazards. If you look at a toy today and see that warning label, it is largely because of this 1970s tragedy. The Colonial Viper is remembered not for its fun factor, but for forcing the industry to finally take child safety seriously. Gerber Singles. In 1974, Gerber, the famous baby food company, thought they had a brilliant idea. They realized that the number of college students and single adults living alone was rising. These people needed quick, easy meals. So Gerber launched Gerber Singles. The promise was simple: ready-to-eat meals in a jar, just for adults. The flavors included things like beef burgundy, Mediterranean vegetables, and creamed beef. It was supposed to be the ultimate convenience food for the modern bachelor. Sounds convenient, right? Well, the execution was baffling. First, there was the texture. It was essentially pureed mush, just like baby food. Adults generally like to chew their food, but Gerber Singles offered a gelatinous sludge that was unappealing to look at and even worse to eat. Then there was the packaging. They used the exact same wide-mouth glass jars they used for babies, just with a slightly more mature label. But the biggest flaw was the name itself. Singles. It implied that if you were eating this, you were alone, sad, and eating paste out of a jar. It was perhaps the most depressing meal concept ever invented. Consumers took one look at it and kept walking. It failed almost immediately. Gerber learned a hard lesson. Just because you can put beef burgundy in a jar doesn't mean you should. What's the strangest product you've ever bought? Whether it's from the 70s or today, let us know in the comments below. The Star Wars Holiday Special. In 1978, George Lucas was the king of the world, and everyone wanted a piece of the Star Wars galaxy. CBS commissioned a television special to bridge the gap between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. The dream was a festive, exciting look into the lives of Chewbacca's family on the Wookiee home planet. It promised to bring the original cast back together, Luke, Han, Leia, for a heartwarming holiday adventure that would delight families across America. But what aired on November 17, 1978, was a drug-fueled fever dream. The special featured 15 excruciating minutes of Wookiees growling at each other with absolutely no subtitles. It had Harvey Korman doing a comedy routine in drag as a four-armed alien cook. It featured a bizarre, sensual musical number by Diane Carroll sung to Chewbacca's dad, named Itchy. It was cheap, confusing, and incredibly boring. Even the cast looked embarrassed to be there, with Harrison Ford looking like he would rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. The reaction was immediate horror. George Lucas famously realized it was a disaster and tried to scrub it from existence, reportedly saying that if he had a hammer and enough time, he would smash every copy. It aired once and was never rebroadcast. Its legacy is purely as a bootleg curiosity, a piece of television so bad that you almost have to watch it to believe it actually happened. 8-track tape players. The 8-track tape was the dominant car audio format of the 70s. The promise was freedom. For the first time, you could take your own albums into the car. You weren't stuck listening to the radio anymore. You could listen to Led Zeppelin or the Eagles on demand, in an endless loop that never needed rewinding. It was supposed to be the ultimate in portable convenience. But the 8-track was fundamentally broken. The songs were arranged on 4 programs across the tape. Because the tape was a continuous loop, the player often had to switch tracks right in the middle of a song. You'd be listening to a guitar solo, it would build to a crescendo, and then K-chunk, silence, followed by the song resuming on the next track. It ruined the listening experience. Also, the tapes were notorious for jamming. The players would often eat the tape, unspooling ribbons of magnetic film all over your dashboard and destroying your favorite album. The sound quality was hiss-filled and muddy. By the end of the decade, the cassette tape arrived. It was smaller, you could rewind it, and it didn't interrupt the music. The 8-track vanished, remembered only for that annoying K-chunk sound. Polyester leisure suits. Fashion in the 70s was a wild experiment, and the polyester leisure suit was its most infamous creation. The promise was a suit that was affordable, durable, and easy to care for. It never wrinkled. It came in vibrant colors like powder blue and mustard yellow, and it was the uniform of the disco era. It was sold as the clothing of the future, a synthetic miracle that would liberate men from the drudgery of ironing. But there was a major downside. Polyester is essentially plastic. It does not breathe. If you wore a leisure suit to a disco and started dancing, you didn't just sweat, you boiled. The fabric trapped heat and moisture against the skin, creating a personal sauna that smelled of body odor and petrochemicals. It was uncomfortable, itchy, and sticky. Furthermore, they were highly flammable. A stray cigarette ash could melt a hole right through your lapel in seconds. As the decade ended, the reaction was a violent swing back toward natural fibers. By 1979, wearing a leisure suit was a sign that you had given up. Today, it stands as a monument to the decade's triumph of style over substance, and a reminder that just because fabric is durable doesn't mean it should be worn. Mood rings. Introduced in 1975, the mood ring became the ultimate fad. The promise was mystical, a stone that changed color based on your emotions. Blue meant you were happy. Black meant you were stressed. Amber meant you were nervous. It was sold as a window into the soul, a piece of jewelry that could tell you how you and your partner were really feeling. But the flaw was that it was junk science. The stone was just a hollow glass shell filled with thermochromic liquid crystals. These crystals reacted to temperature, not emotion. If your hands were cold, the ring turned black. If your hands were warm, it turned blue. It didn't measure your soul, it measured your circulation. It was a glorified thermometer for your finger. The reaction was intense but short-lived. Everyone bought one, wore it for a week, realized it was nonsense, and threw it in a drawer. The mood ring became the symbol of 70s gullibility and new age spirituality. It captures the vibe of a decade searching for meaning in all the wrong places and willing to pay $5 for it. Billy Beer. In 1977, Jimmy Carter was president, and his brother Billy Carter was the nation's favorite beer-drinking redneck. A brewing company decided to capitalize on Billy's fame by launching Billy Beer. The promise was a beer for the common man, brewed specifically for the president's brother. The marketing claimed, "I brewed this beer expressly for me. I think it's the best beer I've ever tasted." It was a pop culture sensation. The flaw was the beer itself. It was terrible. It was a generic, cheap lager that tasted watery and metallic. Even Billy Carter admitted privately that he drank it only for the promotion and actually preferred Pabst Blue Ribbon. The entire product was a cynical cash grab based on a political novelty, with no effort put into the actual quality of the brew. The reaction was a boom and bust. People bought a six-pack as a joke, took one sip, and left the rest in the fridge. The brewery folded in 1978. The legacy is ironic, because so many people kept the unopened cans as collector's items, thinking they would be valuable one day. They are now virtually worthless because there are so many of them. It's the Beanie Baby of the 70s beer world. Corfam shoes. DuPont is a chemical giant that gave us nylon and Teflon. In the 70s, they tried to revolutionize footwear with a material called Corfam. The promise was a synthetic leather that was durable, shiny, and never needed polishing. It was supposed to look perfect forever. DuPont believed this would replace leather shoes entirely, offering a high-tech alternative that was maintenance-free. But there was just one problem. Feet need to breathe. Leather stretches and allows air to circulate. Corfam does not. It was stiff as a board and trapped heat and moisture inside the shoe. Breaking in a pair of Corfam shoes was torture. They caused blisters, they were hot, and they squeaked loudly when you walked. If your feet swelled during a long day, the shoe remained a rigid vice, refusing to give an inch. The reaction was a $100 million loss for DuPont, a staggering amount of money in the 70s. Consumers hated them. DuPont eventually sold the technology to Poland and exited the shoe business. Corfam proved that sometimes nature simply engineered a better material than a laboratory ever could. It remains DuPont's biggest commercial failure. The RCA Studio II. When we talk about 70s video games, we talk about the Atari 2600. We generally do not talk about the RCA Studio II, released in 1977. The promise was a powerful home computer and gaming console in one unit. RCA was a massive electronics company, and they put their full weight behind this machine, hoping to capture the budding video game market. But the flaw was that it was obsolete before it even hit the shelves. It played games in black and white, even though color consoles were already available. It had no sound chip, relying on a simple beeper. But the worst sin was the controller. There were no joysticks. Instead, the console had two keypads built into the plastic body of the machine itself. You had to huddle over the console and press buttons labeled 1 through 9 to move your character. It felt like playing a game on a microwave oven. The reaction was silence. Nobody bought it. It was discontinued almost immediately as consumers flocked to the colorful, joystick-controlled Atari. Its legacy is often cited by historians as the worst video game console of all time. It makes later failures look like masterpieces by comparison. Ayds Diet Candy. This is a tragedy of branding and bad timing. In the 1970s, there was a popular appetite suppressant candy called Ayds, pronounced AIDS. The promise was simple. Eat a chocolate square before a meal, and it would curb your appetite, helping you lose weight effortlessly. For years, it was a top-selling product, advertised in magazines and on TV with great success. The flaw wasn't the product itself. It actually worked well enough for what it was. The flaw was history. As the 1980s approached, the AIDS epidemic emerged. Suddenly, having a product name that sounded exactly like a terrifying, deadly disease was the worst branding nightmare in history. The reaction was inevitable. The company tried to hang on, claiming the spelling was different, but sales collapsed. You simply couldn't advertise "Get AIDS to look good" anymore. The product vanished from shelves. The legacy is a grim reminder that language evolves, and a brand name can turn from an asset to a liability overnight due to unforeseen global events. The Dean Machine. The 1970s were rife with pseudoscience, and the Dean drive, or Dean machine, was the king of physics failures. Norman Dean claimed he had invented a reactionless drive that could convert rotary motion into linear lift. The promise was anti-gravity. He claimed this device could lift itself off the ground without pushing against anything, breaking Newton's laws of motion. It was marketed as the future of space travel, a device that would take us to the stars without rockets. The flaw was that it didn't work. It relied on stiction, static friction, with the floor to create the illusion of movement. When suspended on a pendulum or in a vacuum, the machine just shook violently. It produced zero lift. It was a mechanical illusion, not a breakthrough. The reaction from the scientific community was exhausted debunking, but pop science magazines of the 70s loved it, fueling the hype. It wasted investors' money and time. The legacy is the enduring myth of the free energy device. It represents the 70s fascination with the idea that a guy in a garage could outsmart NASA with a few gears and a dream. Lawn darts, jarts. We end with the most lethal backyard game ever invented. The promise was a fun outdoor activity for the whole family, similar to horseshoes, but more exciting. You threw heavy metal-tipped darts high into the air, trying to get them to stick into a plastic ring on the lawn. It was a staple of 70s barbecues and summer parties, but the flaw is obvious in hindsight. You are throwing weighted spears into the sky while standing near other people. The darts were heavy enough to pierce a human skull, and tragically, they did. If a child ran into the landing zone, or if a throw went wild, the results were catastrophic. The reaction was a series of bans, culminating in a total prohibition. The Consumer Product Safety Commission urged parents to destroy them. Today, it is illegal to even sell them. Its legacy is the ultimate "what were we thinking" product. It symbolizes a time when safety was an afterthought and survival of the fittest applied to family gatherings. The pet rock. We can't talk about the 70s without the pet rock. In 1975, ad executive Gary Dahl had a silly idea. The dream was the perfect pet. It didn't need to be fed, walked, or groomed. It wouldn't chew your slippers or get sick. It was the ultimate low-maintenance companion, packaged in a cardboard carrier with air holes and a care manual. The pivot? It was literally a rock, a gray stone from a beach in Mexico. The flaw was that it did absolutely nothing. It sat there. It was a joke that cost $3.95, which is about $20 today. But the verdict? It was a genius scam. People bought 1.5 million of them in 6 months. It made Dahl a millionaire. But just as quickly as it appeared, the fad died. By 1976, you couldn't give them away. It remains the gold standard for useless fads, proving that in the 1970s, you could sell absolutely anything if the packaging was funny enough. The 1970s was a decade of big swings and even bigger misses. Some of these products were too ambitious, while others were just plain dangerous. But even in failure, they tell us something about the era, a time when we were willing to try anything, buy anything, and occasionally regret everything. Did we miss any massive 70s flops? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.